had a combination of something like 70 to 75 years at Summer Lake between them. And now Marty's had 32 years. So we're already over the century mark with just 3 managers. A lot of staying power down there at Summer Lake. But Marty's done a lot of things different than what both Boyd and Bill did over the years. We've seen a lot of change in the management of the water regime and the ponds. A lot of dikes have been built since then. And his use of that water has really done a lot for green, a lot of shorebirds as well as waterfowl, which was the primary use of Summer Lake when it was first purchased way back in 1944. So without any further ado, I'll have Marty come on up and give us the full deal. Oh, I forgot to tell you, there's one thing that Marty and I had in common, as we made a pact. We made a pact a long time ago, about 5 years ago, that neither one of us would shave until we killed an elk or 5 years went back. And today's my 5-year anniversary. So
it's taken me a while.
Okay, I'm going to.
Thanks, Fred.
You can talk, Marty.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, in addition to what Jim said, I had a little more exposure to Summer Lake prior to moving there as the manager in 1987. In 1980, was a seasonal employee there at Summer Lake. So I kind of got my first taste of it and the first taste of working for ODFW. Prior to that, I'd been working with different agencies. So most right immediately before that, the Forest Service down in Paisley. And then coordinating with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist who had the position after Jim. And, he convinced me to go to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I did that. Came back as a seasonal employee about in 1980. Finally got hired on full-time with the department and spent a few years in Burns, Oregon, working in the habitat program there. And then I had the opportunity to go into the biologist ranks and went up to Enterprise for 2 years before the vacancy at Summer Lake came open and Bill Smith retired. It's a place I fell in love with and just kind of became part of me more than anything. It was a lifestyle, not really a job. It was great. I got paid and got a nice truck you could drive around it quite a bit and stuff. So everything was good. Anyways, I've got just about 19 slides here, and I don't have a lot of pictures. I'm sorry about that. Just even getting what you're going to see now was a monumental achievement for me, and I had lots of help from Gary Ivy helped me and a few other folks that put this thing together. So this is pretty simplistic. I'm hoping for a lot of questions, and we can just kind of talk through it. But Gordon tasked me with kind of 5 main points. You know, why is Summer Lake so special? What's the best way, or what are the resources there? What's the best time to look at the different birds? How to do that? What else did we have on that list? I got a little bit of a history. We'll cover that briefly, and I'll explain a little bit about the management, everything that goes on to kind of produce the final outcome, like the habitat that supports all the birds there. And then finally, kind of what are the challenges down the road? I think someone pointed that out already. Those challenges are there right now, in that way. With that, let's see. I guess we can start moving into it. So this kind of shows you where Summer Lake is situated. Generally, the folks know where Summer Lake is, about 100 miles south and a little bit east from Lakeview or from Vanderveer. And the wildlife area is at the north end.
Because I figured they come into service, they come and charge.
I don't know. It
Turns out
says an image. 2006.
You know, I can't filters it was 2 for 40. I remember you were using
I
before,
don't know.
maybe not.
Everything's more expensive now.
Could be a summertime, yeah. And it varies.
Folks, can I just say, could everybody who's on Zoom please mute themselves because we're getting some feedback from some people chatting. So if everybody could mute, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Good, we needed that.
So I'm done, muted. Anyway, Summer Lake's at the north end. Summer Lake Wildlife Area is at the north end of Summer Lake property.
Bam. Good. Marty,
Any questions so far? Yes, yes, and it's been getting more variable over the last 10 or 20 years. Annually, it does, always. It's an ultra shallow lake, only averages about a foot depth. What's that? Late spring, like, end of March, first part of April. And then when you turn the corner, it starts going the other direction when you start getting into summer. So what makes Summer Lake special for this first question? Well, it's a reliable water source and fairly consistent wetland habitat. And I say that the water source is from springs out of the Anna River that are underneath Anna Reservoir. And they flow at a fairly constant level. Generally, during this time of the year, they are much reduced than in the winter time. A couple different reasons for that are irrigation diversions, and then the biggest thing, or major thing, is evaporation in Summer Lake in the areas on the magnitude of 40 to 50 inches. Precipitation to rejuvenate, it's only 12. So it's a pretty much a deficit system. But having that source of water is very, very fortunate for the wildlife. I think that's what the people, when they established it, they looked at. They did that. It's a pretty large land base, about 19,000 acres. So you've got a lot of land to work with. And there's quite a few diverse habitat features out there. I've got a few pictures of some examples of that. The location and the setting makes it special because for those of you that have been there, it's pretty dramatic. You've got the Summer Lake Wildlife Area, Summer Lake proper, and then back to the west, about 3,000 feet up, it's Winter Ridge that runs right there. It's pretty spectacular. You go to the east, that direction, and you've got the sagebrush forest out there of the Diablo Mountain Golden Study. So you're kind of right on the break point. Top of the Winter Ridge, you've got the coniferous forest. Also, just kind of where we're positioned is pretty good in the flyway. We kind of on a direct path between wintering areas in California or points further south to Mexico, Central America, as far away as south. Did I do something? No. Again, hear me very well. Yeah. Closer to the microphone.
Well, this is the mic.
I'm talking to the crowd. Yeah, so we're in a pretty good position in the Pacific Flyway for all sorts of water birds moving north and south through there. There's a diverse variety of birds, and sometimes it's in very large numbers, especially when you're dealing with some of the waterfowl like Arctic nesting geese, the snow geese. They're very, very numerous. A lot of the ducks are the same way. You'll get populations, in excess of 100,000 individuals there at one time. And I believe the wildlife area is, has a fairly friendly, user-friendly infrastructure out there. People can utilize it and enjoy it. It's unique in that camping is allowed on the wildlife area. I mean, that's something you don't see on national wildlife refuges, rarely if ever. And it's got good vehicle access. Yeah. Good vehicle access for a 8.3 mile viewing loop there. And then there's other access for walking down dikes and other trails on the wildlife area. No, either that or I don't know how to do it.
Sorry, folks.
This would have been really tough.
Okay, I'll restart the screen share.
Yes.
That's the elevation.
Around the, on the wildlife area? Yeah, around 4,300 feet. And you're looking up, you know, up on top of the rim up there around 7,200, kind of depends on where you are. So,
Back in the business.
okay, very good. Yeah, one of the reasons what makes it so special is sometimes you got stuff like this going on, you know, sunrises, sunsets. That makes it well worth the price of admission to be out there in situations like that. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So it's predominantly a wetland area, but we've got, you know, adjacent uplands and stuff, and you'll see a little bit of a breakdown or distribution, keeping in mind it's about 19,000 total acres. Okay. And well, this is going to be pretty much bird centric too. You know, there's lots of other things out here in this wetlands and stuff, and I apologize, I'm not very up on mammals or reptiles or things like that. I got a few listed there or something, but so bear in mind, and I'll answer a few questions for that, but it's mainly the birds, and that's kind of been my interest. But lacustrine wetlands and stuff, that's the lake bed, you know, be right at the head of Summer Lake proper and some of that lake shoreline. The palustrine or the emergent marsh wetlands, and that's kind of the big driver of the system there. You can see there's kind of a diverse array of vegetation in those palustrine wetlands and stuff, ranging from these very tall emergent vegetations like hardstem bulrush, broadleaf cattail, all the way down to really shorter statured things like saltgrass, and then even bare, hot alkaline areas, these white areas down on the lower part of the screen there. Those are the places for the snowy plovers. Those big semi-permanent palustrine wetlands like that are the places for tundra swans that come to us from the Arctic region where they breed. So you got this really wide disparity of species and the habitats that they use, which creates a pretty challenging job to provide everything for as much as you can out there. Okay, briefly, the upland areas, you can kind of see that sagebrush steppe, and then we've got some agricultural lands. And when I get into the history of it, I'll explain a little bit more about the project and the acquisition, but a lot of it was acquired, old ranches and such were acquired, and those have been farmed or developed that way for farming operations, and the department carried that on in some instances, you know, for specific management purposes. But we've got other places that are largely undeveloped, and that's that salt desert scrub that you see there. Okay, the wildlife species. We've got about 280 species of birds and counting. I think there's probably more that are going to show up. There's a lot that haven't been there yet or haven't been detected there yet. And then I counted it up with on the long range plan, about 19 amphibians and reptiles out there, and then 37 mammal species. So someone could probably really build on that, especially if they started looking for the smaller mammals and things like that. Okay, when to visit? I get that question, or I got that question quite often when I was the manager there. When's the best time to come to Summer Lake? And I would automatically reply, and I tried to not portray it as being too flippant. It was, well, what do you want to see? Because Summer Lake is a hard place to come to see everything or spectacular components of it, unless you make multiple trips there. What I've got listed down here is kind of these species groups, like waterfowl, that late winter, early spring time period. That's when you see those huge flocks of snow geese and a lot of the ducks that are working their way back up north to breeding areas. Then that starts winding down to the breeding season, and then it turns the corner in late summer and then picks up for the southward migrants heading back through the area. So you got that going on. Shorebirds, they're a little bit later. They're coming in early spring in that March time period, March and April. They're spread out. Long-billed curlews, they show up in early March. Some of the other ones don't show up until late April, the first arrivals. And so you've got a big gap in there. So you need to come back for several visits to see everything. During the breeding season, there's 9 species that breed on Summer Lake shorebirds. So we've got 9 breeding species there. And they're mixed in with migrants that are still headed north. We know this from some of the annual count that we've been doing with East Cascades Audubon Society that I set up. It was the shorebird and other waterbird survey that we try and hit this breeding season, end of May, first part of June. And we've got a lot of species that don't breed here, but they show up on that survey. And so they're moving through. You wait a little while, early or late summer in July, you're starting to see southward migration. Those birds are heading south. So there's another time period to check it out. The passerines, a little bit later, probably that late March is our early spring in March, just generally a month, and then peaking in mid-May. That's when we see most of the passerines. Any questions about that? It's kind of confusing, complex. Yes, Gary.
I suggest you mention the swan peaks in the.
Yes, Gary brings up a good point. The swans, they are absent until the end of October or the first part of November. That's when they get to us. And the tundra swans are coming from the Arctic. The trumpeter swans are kind of subarctic, and we're finding out that they're coming from northern Alberta, and they stage in Summer Lake. They spend the winter there. Some of them continue south, and ultimately large numbers of tundra swans especially are in California. But then in January and February is when we have large swan numbers at Summer Lake. We established a swan survey usually in February that tries to capture that abundance and the proportion of trumpeters to tundra swans. How to tour? I mentioned earlier that viewing loop about 8.5 miles. That's a good way. It is open during most of that time period that we talked about there, that spring time period into late summer, early fall. But once hunting seasons start, then that viewing loop shuts down. And the reason for that is that that loop would actually take you through areas that are designated closed to hunting. And then it's a sanctuary for water birds to be in during hunting seasons. So there's that delay right there. And it's usually, a few days prior to, 3 days prior to the hunting seasons that you would have that. The dikes and trails, the main dikes, there's two in the center. I can kind of point those out to you. Those are open to motor vehicles outside of the breeding season. You'll see we've got a closure there from March 15 through August 15. That is kind of the beginning of breeding season and brood breeding season. So we don't want a lot of disturbance by motor vehicles driving back and forth down there. It is open to non-motorized travel. I mean, you could hike, you could ride mountain bikes, nothing motorized down there. And yeah, that could probably create some disturbance too, but we found, it's just like, it seems that if you can't drive, not many people are taking advantage of it. So that is something that Summer Lake offers. And, you would have the ability to walk down there or bike. There's lots of places to go during that time period. Campgrounds, they're primitive. There's no hookups or anything like that. They're big flat spots. They've got outhouse or vault toilets. They're all wheelchair accessible now. Finally have that. There's trash barrels out there. We've got just kind of standard with ODF and W, the agency, is a 14-day stay. Sometimes there can be some exceptions to that with a permit. And then those campgrounds too, they also serve as a really good jump off point to go to other places, to go up on Winter Rim, to look at the woodpeckers that are up there, or go up the short distance and where the blueberry gnatcatchers are, and find them up there, or head out the other direction in the desert to the east and find burrowing owls out there, or black-throated sparrows. So you've got lots of good options to kind of take off from Summer Lake at this one campsite. And just being there, it's like a ideal or a perfect spot for a big sit. I mean, you can sit in the campground and literally there's birds flying by. You could really build a big list by just sitting there and watching and listening and such. The campgrounds are just right on the edge inside the marsh. Downside of that is they're right on the edge inside of the marsh, which is where mosquitoes sometimes live. But it's not too bad out there. You go back closer to the highway, around the buildings that have got lawns that are irrigated or shrubbery. That seems where mosquitoes are bad. But out there in the middle of the marsh, they don't seem to be as fierce, except right at dusk and at dawn. And my theory is, well, there's just a lot of things that like to eat mosquitoes, so that works out well that way. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the department, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, ODFW, the agency mission is, you can read it right there. And that's basically, kind of standard across the agency. Here's a photo of Summer Lake, and it got pretty good water in it. This must be a summertime period too. We've got green and the lake is still holding up good. It was established, as Jim mentioned, in 1944 as the first Pittman-Robertson U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Oh, Marty's starting.
Is that a question? Oh. Okay. It was the first PR funded in the
Yeah.
Pittman-Robertson Act.
What? Yes.
That was in 1939. It was an excise
Okay. Yeah.
on sporting arms and ammunition. So all hunters had
So now
to
we need to bring up the
pay this excise tax that was at the manufacturer's level. You okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
sound. We don't hear the sound.
Jim Anderson.
What's that?
It's Jim Anderson talking.
Jim,
Oh.
turn your mic off. How do we do that?
So the 1939 is when the act was put into effect, and the excise tax and the monies were starting to be generated at that time. And it wasn't until 1944 that they actually really started going on.
New options.
You know, I think World War II was right in that time period, so it's probably pretty tough to administer it. And that PR funding is the primary source that has been utilized at Summer Lake and is still the major source right now. We're starting to pick up a few other
Click on
things.
this.
The wildlife area parking permit, and then with what Jim's going to be
Oh,
talking
mute
about.
my
we're hoping
audio.
that can
Okay,
also
mute.
get some money
Click on
into
that.
the agency. At that time, when it was established, the primary objectives were, providing the waterfowl habitat and public hunting. Those are the main drivers of it. The biggest thing that took place, and it was cooperative in nature, was with the BLM, the withdrawal of 7,000 acres from the BLM's land base, and it's by presidential proclamation, in addition to ODF and W purchasing some property there to form the Summer Lake Wildlife Area, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as kind of being the overseer or the kind of the leading partner in it. And ODF and W bought lands that are on the lake bed of Summer Lake as described by the 1874 survey. When the first settlers kind of came to that, they said, this is the lake bed of Summer Lake. And so one state agency had to buy it from another state agency. I guess that's commonplace, but it turned out to be the cornerstone of the wildlife area. And then I mentioned earlier, then we just slowly added on as lands became available to move us on up to that 19,000 total. Okay, any questions with that? Or you good? Yeah. The wildlife area or the?
No, it's not the wildlife, but the geographically, very part of something. Right.
Yeah, the entire lake bed kind of along Highway 31 is just a whole series of private ranches, and they abut to adjoin the wildlife area. That there's no in-holdings. And I thought that's what you were asking. There's no in-holdings that way, but yeah, they're adjacent to us. Kind of, we're surrounded mainly on the west and the extreme south side, southwest side. To the east is BLM land out there. You have to go a long distance to get the private land. To the north, yeah, you get some development up there around Anna Reservoir. Yes.
Where is the playa before
Yeah, the playa, it's about midway down the lake, about 10 miles from the wildlife area. It's at, south of us quite a ways.
Back on stream.
Back on stream? Okay, very good. Okay, so we've got this big land base out there. It's funded, federal aid funded. And I got there in 1987, and I was tasked with writing the first management plan for the wildlife area in 1993. That was the first one that came out. It was kind of a different concept, but we kind of based it on these key species, and we found out later, this doesn't work very well when you're basing it on these migratory water birds that we've got no control over where they want to go or what happens at the breeding areas or down in the summering areas. So subsequent management plans mainly focused on habitats. Basically, the idea is, you build it and they will come type deal. And so we went with that approach. And you can see our three main goals there, dealing with the wetland habitat, then with the upland habitat, and then being an agency that wants the public to enjoy it. That was our third goal there. With the habitat aspects of it, then what I did was divide the area up into these habitat management units. And these, it's not based on specific habitat types or anything. These are based on just ease of management. These units within those are going to have different types of wetland habitats or upland habitats. But this is how we manage them. We may decide in 1 year that the gold dye compoundment, we're going to draw it down and dry it up for a year. And then, do something different in other places. With the alkaline playa down there in the lower right-hand corner, we don't really want to do anything with that, just protect it. Keep illegal ORV or ATV use off of it. So the management units kind of gave us some way to manage habitats more effectively. So here's some of the objectives for the wetland habitats. I won't read them. I'll give you a few minutes to kind of look at them and digest them a little bit if you are so inclined. You can see that the semi-permanently flooded are probably the largest. And then with the intermittently flooded lacustrine wetlands too, those are pretty substantial. Okay, any questions on this? Now, yes.
One of the objectives goals would be provide educational opportunities for providing some examples of educational opportunities.
What was that?
Educational. That was one of the goals, was providing educated wildlife education opportunities. That's the recreation development education.
Yeah.
What would be an example of education activities?
Well, we've got objectives for that and strategies for that, like entertaining youth groups, school groups annually. COCC classes come there for the birds of the Pacific Northwest, mammals of the Pacific Northwest. They come through there, so we've got those educational opportunities. And then at a higher level, you'll see I've got a few listed here, some research that takes place on the wildlife area that would be educational in nature too. Did I answer that question for you?
Well, partly anyway, yeah, that's good.
Okay. So upland, kind of similar. We've got, strategies. Each of these objectives, they've got a long list of strategies, and I didn't want to put those on there. I mean, it would be really cumbersome to go through that. But you can see these are kind of the main things that we're looking at. And then we've got these getting back to your question. We at Summer Lake, there now is 4 full-time people there on that. When I was there, we were at 3.75. So, it was a seasonal employee, but now they've got 4 people there. So we didn't have anyone that was really a specialist interpretation. In our lobby area at the headquarters office, there are some panels there, but it's nothing like you see at the National Wildlife Refuge System. Okay, so in the course of the year, here's the things that we do on the wildlife area. I mean, just to keep it, providing the habitat for that diverse array of birds. I mean, we've got a wide variety of projects that we work on. They're not all done at the same time at every place, but these are some of the tools in our toolbox. And As I mentioned, four bodies. I mean, we did everything from answering the phone to paying the bills and such. So it was quite a harried type activity. Now here's some of the other stuff that could be kind of interpretive in nature, if you will. These are some of the projects that we've undertaken over the years. Some of them, you know, we're not working on currently, but there was a big push for working with Arctic nesting snow geese. They were coming to us from Wrangel Island, Russia. I mean, they figured that out long ago, that you know, this was taking place, and the Russians were very concerned at one time because those numbers were down, and so we were doing some research at Summer Lake and in California to help out that population. It was really just an incredible experience. I had the opportunity in the mid-90s to travel to Wrangel Island and work for 6 weeks up there with the Russian scientists and see that. That's a whole nother presentation of its own. Thule greater white-fronted geese, white-fronted geese, greater white fronts. The Pacific subspecies is the one, the little guy, is pretty numerous. They're all over California. The Thule is a little bit different. They're not very numerous. There's maybe only 12 to 15,000 of those, but they use Summer Lake religiously in the fall and spring. Their name kind of spells out their behavior. They like the Thule marshes. You don't find them in grain fields or alfalfa fields. They're in the Thule type habitats. And so that's been a big project for us. Cinnamon teal, it's something that the USGS out of California, they're very interested in. Sandhill cranes, been kind of working with them in the past, doing, Gary Ivy did some initial surveys in the state, kind of the breeding population, these greater sandhill cranes, staging numbers and locations on the wildlife area. We did some banding to just kind of see the site fidelity of some of these species and where they ended up in winter. Bergen falcons were reintroduced at Summer Lake. Snowy plovers are a pretty big feature on Summer Lake. And you can see some of the other species down there.
Skip over.
What's that?
Skip the trumpeters.
Oh yeah, there's trumpeter swans. That's a big program. Sorry, thanks, Gary. Trumpeter swans. We're working within the Pacific Flyway and the Fish and Wildlife Service to establish a breeding population. Mount Airy National Wildlife Refuge used to have a large breeding population. Summer Lake is a good fit for that too. So we've been working we've been working since the 1990s on it. We really got serious in 2009, but that's continuing to date. And some of the spin-offs on that is we have increased the wintering habitat for trumpeters at Summer Lake. Any other questions here? We could go on for a long time with this. Okay. Okay, the management challenges of the future, as I mentioned, they're here with us right now. It's just finding adequate amounts of water. As I mentioned, I showed up at Summer Lake in 1987, and at that time, it was kind of recognized the discharge or the flow of the Anna River coming out of Anna Reservoir was about 80 to 90 cubic feet per second. And over the years, we watched that rate decline until now we are down around 60 or 65 CFS. So that's quite a bit of a reduction. And, you know, trying to figure out the reasons why, we're not sure. There could be a lot of things, you know, long-term climate change. It's mainly groundwater, so it's an aquifer, and we don't know enough about that. So that's a major concern and a challenge to figure out what to do about that. One thing we do need is a lot more information to deal with that. And then funding is another big part of it. Because of that water challenge, decreasing amount of water, we've had to do some major work on the wildlife area as far as making water use very, very efficient. I mean, we've done a lot of water control structure work, dike construction, so we're able to fine tune how we move water around and make the most basically of every drop we have. And that costs a lot of money. When I was there between 2009 and 2014, we finished a big project that hit the major wetland units, probably covered close to 7,000 or 8,000 acres. But that was over $2 million that we invested into that. Working with Ducks Unlimited, they brought in big grants from the North American Wetland Conservation Act. So that's another thing that we need to see continue, and hopefully with what Jim's talking about, we can kind of get that light going in that direction. And then public use, it's picking up. I mean, I've really seen a dramatic increase, which in some ways is great. People are getting out to enjoy it and appreciate it and probably support it. But with that, sometimes comes issues of kind of, loving it to death type of deal. I mean, we can have too much use out there to where it becomes a disturbance. And so that's just something that we will have to be ready to manage. Right now, we haven't seen any issues, but it's just something that we've got to keep in the back of our mind that we could get there someday. One direction. There. Okay, that pretty much is it. That wasn't too long. Great. Any other questions, or we can talk for a while? Alice, yes. Snowy plovers at Summer Lake? Yes, they're doing pretty good. Trying to think of numbers. Last year we had a larger survey. You may have participated in the Harney Basin with it or something, maybe. But we had, I think it was 250 or so in the basin at Summer Lake. And then this year, we did the same thing, just mainly at Summer Lake. And I believe that number was 125. And I know when I did we coordinated the breeding shorebird and other waterbird survey there the third week of May. Craig Miller saw like 90 on his own there on the wildlife area. So snowy plovers seem to be doing very well there. It's an ideal situation. We can manage the habitats that really help them. We send water to kind of the edge of the lake where they're out on the playa nesting out there, but they bring their chicks into a fresh water source, and we've got a good ability to get that fresh water for those chicks while their salt lands are developing. Yes.
When do you normally have the most visitors there, and we have an average getting for a year now?
We do not have very good information for what I like to call, they say, not supposed to, but the non-consumptive users, the people that aren't hunting. Hunting, we've got firm numbers. A hunter has to have a permit to be out there. The wildlife viewers, photographers, campers, just tried to set up a survey, kind of a random survey, and also couldn't really develop anything because we're open 24 hours too. And so people can come and go. They don't have to come through the headquarters. They can come in other avenues of the area. So it's just really tough to set up anything that would be rigorous enough to give you, an idea of what the use is. But the time periods seems like it's April through June. And this time of year, July, it seems like, well, maybe it gets too hot and the birds, they're kind of coming out of the breeding season. Some of them are going into the mold. They're not as colorful and spectacular as they were, in May and June. So, maybe people kind of lay off that, and maybe there's other places for them to go. And then in the fall, it picks up a little bit, and we get that southward push of shorebirds coming through, and some of the migrant passerines start moving through. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you.
What is it like in the winter there? What is the hunting season?
The hunting seasons are generally early October through the end of January. And that sounds like, wow, geez, that's a long period of time, but for all practical purposes, it pretty well ends at the end of November, as far as the interest of the hunters, and after that, it's just very, very sporadic. So there's not a lot of activity. And it is a time period too, a lot of people think, oh, geez, if they're hunting, I can't go there. Well, you certainly can. I mean, you can use the same infrastructures that hunters do. On some days and late in the season, there might only be a dozen hunters on 12,000 acres. So you can find lots of places, to go and look for birds. At the edge of one refuge area, we have got a blind set up there, the Schoolhouse Lake Viewing Station. It was developed by ECAS members quite a few years ago, that we allow people to come into it, to the blind, no further than that, because it's a refuge. We don't want to disturb the birds that are refugee out there. So it's a great viewing opportunity there. The winters, we're generally a milder climate. It gets cold, but not for an extended period of time. And then another thing we have going for us is the Anna Reservoir, Anna River water. It kind of stays fairly warm. It's about 59 degrees year round. And so there's been times we've been out there, it would be 21 below, I can remember, at that Schoolhouse Lake had open water at that time. That and the river is moving, and so we keep open water. And so there's a handful of birds that stick around there. Our waterfowl numbers, they're the most hardiest. They drop down to around 5,000 to 10,000 in the dead of winter. Christmas bird count that we do, we can usually turn up around 75, 80 species. So, yeah, so there's still life in the dead of winter. But then 95% of the marsh can freeze over. And then 1 week later, it'll warm up. And one thing I didn't mention, this isn't just totally a rosy picture. The wind can blow at Summer Lake. It can blow like you've never seen. So, but the wind will then, warmer temperatures, the wind will remove that ice, and we can go from 95% frozen over to 100% open in January. Yeah. But when that happens, when it goes open, it's like, wow, it's great. Where are the birds? Well, they're all down south. They didn't get to know it, open for business. Okay.
Thank you, Marty.
Oh,
Nice to see you traffic. Activities. Is that regular to go traffic?
trucking? Yes, totally regulated. And it's mainly for muskrats. Muskrats, they do good things, as in building, huts out there. But they do really bad things as far as undoing our infrastructure, dikes and canals. I mean, they've got different ideas. Beavers have really come on strong too, so we're having quite a challenge with beavers too. So it's well regulated. We usually set quotas on that, and it's during a very short window, time period in there. Yes.
Related question, given the environmental and other stresses on our birds, has sufficient wildlife to consider the hunting aspect of your mandate here? Are they still supporting that? Is it detrimental to our wildlife?
The hunting?
Yes.
No.
You don't think so?
No, it's been going on ages, and it is very strictly regulated. as far as the amount that can be harvested, the types. A lot of the mortality is compensatory in nature, meaning that, you remove them, by hunting, or you let them, fall out from disease or something else. So no, it's pretty well regulated and does not have any deleterious effects because of the regulation and management.
One more question in the chat, and then we're gonna have Jim join us. Someone's asking, what is the plan for keeping water in the lake since it is now declining so much? I'm assuming we're talking about Summer Lake as opposed to the Wild Lake area.
About 6,000 acres of the wildlife area is the lake, based on that 1874 survey. People ask me that. And so we're just hanging on to that all of it. And we'll probably be there, where we are right now. What typically happens is the lake gets a very low ebb, probably in September. And then after that, irrigation season starts winding down. The days are getting shorter. It's getting cooler. And so the discharge or the output of the Anna River increases, and that lake increases in size October, November, December, January, all the way around to April. So right now it's still functioning that way. It used to be a lot more resilient than it has in the last 20 years, but it's still doing the same thing. And I think, and that this will have to be looked at a little harder, but by doing that, those big movements back and forth, that actually created some emergent marsh habitat at the head of Summer Lake that we never had before. And so, and it's at a magnitude of 500 or 600 acres up there. Okay.
Thank you, Marty.
Yes.
Next, we'll have Jim Greer, and I'll let Jim introduce himself
All right.
and give us a little background.
Yeah, I guess I better get over here. Straight spots. And this is working okay. This one here. Maybe.
Screen share already?
So I'm Jim Greer. Started my career out permanently at Summer Lake. Worked my way up through ODFW to become director for 4 years. And then I saw the light and went to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's kind of a joke. It really wasn't that great. I worked for Fish and Wildlife Service for 6 years, and my last 4 in Washington, D.C., and was head of the Wildlife and Sports Fish Restoration Program, which doled out millions of dollars from the excise tax on hunting and fishing equipment to all the 50 states and territories, fish and wildlife agencies. So that was one program, I'll tell you, that everybody loved us because we gave away money, so to speak. But today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, which is a concept that was attempting to get new monies on a permanent basis for a non-game species, non-hunter fish forest species. And back in 1987 or 89, I went to the first conference called A Bridge to the Future, where the whole idea of taxing birdseed, binoculars, and all those good things continued to fail in Congress. Those were federal tax proposals. Oregon had some similar concepts, and in 2015, a Blue Ribbon Committee was put together, and I think the governor put all these folks in the same room for a long time. It was called the Blue Ribbon Committee on Funding Non-Game Species. And of course, they came up with very similar types of state taxes or state programs that are generated at the state level. They failed. So come 2016, a fellow by the name of Ken Helm, he's a representative legislator from Beaverton, came up with some other legislators, came up with a kind of cool idea. They got the legislature to agree to put $1 million off to the side for non-game type species. They put a caveat on and told ODFW, you can't have any of that money until you match it. So what this fund had in its legislation was the creation of an advisory committee. So the advisory committee put a coalition of folks together, I don't know, something like 50 different organizations committed to help raising these funds that would be matched by the state legislature. So because we were right in the middle of COVID, that made it very challenging, trying to outreach to you folks to get people to donate. But in the end, they did a very good job. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the accomplishments they did through these slides. So 2019 was the year that Ken Helm and some other representatives put together House Bill 2829. And that kind of changed the whole look of what this fund was going to do. It included the term recreation. So the concept behind it was to show where the kind of nexus was between what we're trying to do for species identified in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is to address all species of greatest conservation need, and link that to all the new recreation activities that are going on in the state. And where there's a problem, they were putting together a program that would grant different projects, like including, just for an example, putting in a new trail, but the trail would not have an impact on the conservation of the species in that area. And vice versa, if we had some research or habitat improvement projects, they could still accommodate to a certain degree recreational activities, as long as the two didn't create problems with each other. So it was a kind of a unique way of bringing folks from the conservation community and folks from the outdoor community, and I'm talking about everybody, ORVs, skiers, hikers, bikers, all the people that you see in the woods every day, together and kind of work towards a common goal of getting these match dollars so that the legislature would give them up to $1 million. So let's go to the next one real quick. No, that's good. So the advisory committee was appointed by the governor. So the governor picked people from geographic regions, and I'll show you where those are in a minute, to put together their mission and goal statements, to talk about what they really are trying to do prioritize wise, restoring healthy ecosystems, investing in science and research. But those bottom two were new concepts related to recreation, connecting youth, families, diverse and underserved communities in the outdoors. And some of the projects that have been approved do a really good job of that. And then helping Oregonians learn more about what it takes to conserve non-game species so that they're still there in the future. Pretty basic stuff. But what they had to do then was convince this coalition of 50 organizations to get out there and hit the ground running to get money. So I'll give you a little bit of an update on what's happened to date. That 500,000 that they raised in the first 2 years, 19, 20, and 21, they got about $500,000, which gave them another half from the legislature through their emergency meetings, emergency funding. They were able to swoop in and get that 500,000 from the emergency fund and then matched it with the donated dollars. So they put a little over $1 million on the ground in the first 2 years. And that impressed the legislature a great deal, because just in this last short session of the legislature, 2022, they committed through various other programs to run their funds through the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund and Advisory Committee to the tune of almost $5 million over the next 2 years. So if any of you donated to that fund, your money was well spent and really encouraged legislators that are really hard to squeeze money out of to come up with an additional $5 million. And that can be spent now over this next state biennium. So here's your advisory committee. I'm not sure if you know any of these folks, but most of them are very entrenched in the conservation community. The chair, Dr. Carl Winters, a retired physician, and he has many conservation projects on the ground in the Klamath area. The vice chair is really involved in outreach and education. He's also just a great communicator and helped really write some of the doctrine that's based in that 2028 bill that was passed a while back. One of the people that is right here in Central Oregon is Marty Judy. She's a forest ecologist, retired. She used to work at Sisters Ranger District. So she's kind of your go-to person. They're responsible, like I said, for these ecoregions down in the lower right-hand corner. And they're the person that's trying to communicate with folks to help them understand what OCRF is all about and how their organizations may want to apply for grant funding. There's 2 vacant positions, Columbia Plateau and Blue Mountains regions, and the Northern Basin and Range Eco region, essentially everything east of the Cascades. So if you know anybody or if you're interested and you got a good background in conservation, just like this guy's looking for you to help him out, these people are looking for help too. Here's that coalition I mentioned. The one organization that isn't up here is called the East Cascades Audubon Society. So you might want to talk to your board and say, hey, we need to get our logo up there. Yeah, and the one thing, there's only really one advantage, and that is these organizations help promote the concept, help promote the program, and it also links them into the communications of the advisory committee. So when there's like a funding window where they're accepting grant proposals, these organizations will know about it. Same thing on the other end, when they go through the review process and ranking process, they'll put out information regarding that because they don't make the final decision. The final decision on grant funding is with the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission. So that's the real link to ODFW.
Say that again.
But the grant proposals that are reviewed by the committee, the advisory committee, then their recommendations go to the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission for final approval and funding. So the granting structure is pretty straightforward. If you've ever applied for a grant, a request for proposals, online, you can see all of the information required to submit to the OCRF board. But the competitive granting process is really kind of the mainstream way to go. That's where most all of the grants are approved through. Early on, when they didn't have a lot of money, but had a lot of applications, they kept the maximum to $10,000 per grant. Now that $10,000 may actually match a whole lot of other money, but that's as much as the OCRF would commit to any one grant. That's now moved up to 50,000. And now we're seeing a lot more applications because there's a lot more money that you can do a lot more with out there on the ground. The other one's called direct awards outside the competitive fund process, is more for specific projects. And I'll give you an example. You're familiar with the Sun River underpass for wildlife, where they've put fencing along the highway and built travel ways underneath it for deer, elk, and just about anything else that uses that. Well, the new one that was recently committed near Gilcrest on Highway 97, as it was being built, there was 2 organizations that wanted to fund that, send money to that project, but didn't have a really clear path to technically get financially their money to the overall project. So they went through OCRF, gave them the money. That money went back to the project. And this was early on, OCRF got a $300,000 total funding that helped match more of that $1 million that was available to them. So it's kind of a unique way. It has to go through quite a bit of review. It's not just anybody that says, I got money, I want to see that project done, and here it is. They'll go through quite a lot of detail about what the project's all about. So here's the projects that have been approved to date. 61 projects. This is that first $1 million. I think it's actually about 1.1 million that's been spent. All those little numbers in red are where the projects are located. So we've got a pretty good diversity of projects across the state and quite a diversity of species and activities related to the goals and mission of the Oregon Conservation Fund. So if you want to know where all the details are, I've just given you kind of a quick eyebrow of the whole thing here. Go to this particular website. It's called OregonIsAlive.org. And that not only will give you the information on granting processes, but it also has a list of all the projects that have been approved and done to date with just a little bit of a background history of each one, so you can see what's going on in the program in total. So that's pretty much it, Gordon, unless you want to see the page that I'm talking about that has some of those projects. You want to see that? Or are you all so tired and hot that you want to get out of here? Yes.
What is the total amount available each year?
Well, it varies. And like I said, this last legislative session, the short session, January or whatever expired.
So are they kicking in $1 million every year as long as they have matching funds?
You have to get it approved by the legislature. So right now we've got about 5 million in the bucket. And until that's spent and gone through the granting process, legislature will probably review it every year and give it new funding. It had a sunset clause in that House Bill 2829. Sunset was the first 2 years. So if they weren't successful, the whole program was going away. The legislature was holding their feet to the fire. Can you pull up that other little, remember that second one I had in there? Questions? There has been one question in the past that's kind of on people's minds, probably more at ODFW than anywhere, and that is that match requirement going to go forward? In other words, are we going to continue to have to dig up funds from the general public? Well, for some of those funds that they got this last session, it's not.
Oh, here, this one, word.
Yeah, that's it. But there may be a small requirement for donations for matching about a significant amount, anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. That hasn't been determined yet. So they're still seeking funds, no question about that. But they're not in quite the panic that they were in the first 2 years, where if they didn't get a large enough match, the whole program probably would have gone away. So maybe we can just scroll through these, Gordon. Can you just hit like one of these guys here? No? Just scroll through for the,
Pictures.
yeah. Okay, so Lake Creek restoration with students and U.S. Forest Service up by Subtle Lake. A lot of these are creek restorations, habitat restoration projects, but they get a second benefit by bringing kids from urban areas, students of color from the urban areas, and like in Portland. And they kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, those goals that they're trying to get more kids, more people out in the natural world so they understand what's at stake in terms of losing some of these issues. Here's the Gilcrest underpass, the directional fencing. The money didn't go for the digging out underneath. It went specifically just to the fencing that goes out, I don't know, 1 mile or 2 on each side of the underpass. So monitoring efforts for rare carnivores. This one I think is primarily for wolverine. We have just a few wolverine in the state, so a lot of this is just trying to determine what their key habitats are, where they're locating. Most of this is up in the WLA Mountains, Northeast Oregon. So I could go on and on here because there are 51 of them. Here's a new idea. What seemed to me like 100 years ago, ODFW introduced sea otter on the Oregon coast, and they didn't take. And so they just believed in those days that our coastal areas just weren't productive enough or accommodating enough for the habitat needs of the sea otter. So I can't even pronounce it, Alliance, which is a coastal-based area, asked for $10,000, and the total project cost you can see is $168,000 to do a feasibility study to see how is our coast now if we were to bring sea otter from either Alaska or for California. Do we think we'd have a better chance of maintaining them over time? So that's more of a research project. It's not something necessarily right on the ground. Here's one close to home, Crooked River National Grassland Sustainable Trails Project. So I think this was improvement on existing trails and extension of trails in the Ochoco's. And again, they weren't going to get that money unless they could show that that wasn't going to have a major impact on fish and wildlife. So that would be like if you put a major biking trail through Deer Winter Range, which is being swallowed up by development almost every day. That probably wouldn't have worked. But this one met all those challenges and got funded. So that's what you'll see on OregonIsLive.org. You'll see all 60 some odd projects, give you an idea what's going on. So if you know of different organizations or people within them that are going, scratching their heads, geez, we're doing really good stuff on the ground, but we just don't have enough money. Have them take a look at this because it could be just what they're looking for to get the projects done. So there you go. Yes, Barry.
I submitted a proposal for this program last winter via the Trumpet Swan Society to work with ODF and W and Mountain Refuge to put GSM technology collars on migrating trumpet swans. So that's a continuation of an ODF and W study. So we're going to get that going this next winter. Mark trumpet swans.
Yeah, and a point that can be made by that is because of the limited amount of funding, they had some really good projects after they prioritized them that still were kind of below the cut line. And now that we're seeing some new funds added this last year, some of those other projects that probably would have been funded if the money was there won't get funded. So keep at it. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Marty. Marty had a long day today. He drove in from Summer Lake and he's driving back out tonight. So stay awake, Marty. And thanks everyone for coming out, and Zoom audience, thank you for joining.
Well, we have a phase 2. Yeah, you know, you should.